Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. The storage facility squatted like a metal beast against the scorching San Antonio sky, its endless rows of orange doors baking under the relentless August sun. Elena Vasquez sat in her battered Honda, air conditioning wheezing, staring at Unit 247, the last connection to her sister Maria, who died 3 weeks ago in what police called a single-car accident. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since their bitter fight about family loyalty and the dangerous people Maria had started running with. Now, 7 months pregnant and drowning in medical bills, Elena clutched the key the lawyer had given her. Maria had been secretive, paranoid even, but she'd never mentioned owning a storage unit. As Elena wadded to the door, her unborn daughter kicked restlessly, as if sensing her mother's unease. The lock was new, expensive, strange for someone who claimed to be broke. When the metal door rolled up with a grinding screech, Elena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't storage. It was something else entirely, something that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her sister. What had Maria been hiding in the shadows of their border town, and why did Elena suddenly feel like she was being watched? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's hands trembled as she stepped into the storage unit, the cool air hitting her like a physical wall after the oppressive heat outside. The space stretched back farther than she'd expected, meticulously organized in a way that felt more like a medical facility than storage. Cribs lined one wall, not old forgotten furniture, but pristine white models with fresh sheets and tiny blankets folded with military precision. Her pregnant belly brushed against a small changing table as she moved deeper into the unit, her nursing instincts cataloging the medical equipment with growing alarm. An infant scale, oxygen tanks, 4 bags hanging from portable stands. This was professional-grade gear, the kind she used in the pediatric ICU, not something a struggling single woman should own. But it was the photographs that made her stomach lurch. Dozens of pictures covered a corkboard mounted on the far wall. Tiny faces, newborn after newborn, each image carefully labeled with dates and what looked like case numbers. Elena recognized none of them, yet each photo bore Maria's distinctive handwriting on the back. She pulled one down with shaking fingers. Baby M, 6 lbs 3 ounces, delivered 8:15. Placement confirmed. Placement confirmed. The words echoed in her mind as her daughter shifted restlessly inside her, a sharp kick against her ribs that felt almost like a warning. Elena sank into a folding chair positioned near a small desk, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. The desk was covered with manila folders, each containing what appeared to be medical records written in Maria's neat script. Names she didn't recognize. Addresses in neighborhoods she knew were home to undocumented families, payment amounts that made her breath catch, thousands of dollars per delivery. She opened the top folder with trembling hands. Isabella Moreno, age 16, no insurance, no documentation. Maria had tracked everything: prenatal visits, nutritional supplements, the girl's fears about being discovered by immigration authorities. And then, at the bottom of the file, a different kind of notation: Client 447th, confirmed payment. Delivery arranged through Dr. K. No contact protocol in effect. Elena's nursing training kicked in despite her shock. She'd worked with enough scared teenagers to read between the lines. These girls had trusted Maria, come to her when they had nowhere else to turn. But instead of helping them keep their babies, Maria had been... The sound of gravel crunching outside made Elena freeze. Footsteps approached the unit, slow and deliberate. She quickly shoved the folder back onto the desk and stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the open doorway, she could see a black SUV parked 3 units down, a vehicle that definitely hadn't been there when she'd arrived. "Mrs. Vasquez?" A man's voice, polite but with an edge that made every instinct scream danger. Elena moved toward the entrance, positioning herself where she could see out but keeping most of her body hidden behind the doorframe. A tall man in an expensive suit approached, his face hidden behind sunglasses despite being inside the covered facility. Everything about him screamed money and menace. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" Elena called out, proud that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "My name is Dr. Kenneth Morrison. I believe your sister mentioned me." He stopped just outside the unit, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive that couldn't quite mask an underlying scent of antiseptic. "I was sorry to hear about Maria's accident." Elena's blood chilled. Dr. K, the name from the files. "I don't think Maria mentioned you." She lied, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. "And I'm just here cleaning out her things." Of course. His smile was perfectly calibrated, the kind doctors used when delivering devastating news to families. "I just wanted to make sure you were aware that your sister had some outstanding obligations. Professional commitments that don't simply disappear when someone passes away." The threat was wrapped in silk, but Elena heard it clearly. Her daughter kicked again, harder this time, and Elena had the strangest sensation that the baby was trying to tell her to run. "I'm afraid I don't know anything about Maria's business affairs," Elena said, taking a step back into the unit. "You'd need to speak with her lawyer." "Perhaps, but sometimes family members inherit more than just possessions." Dr. Morrison's gaze moved deliberately to Elena's pregnant belly, lingering there long enough to make his meaning crystal clear, especially when they're in such similar circumstances. Elena's mouth went dry. Similar circumstances. He knew she was alone, struggling, vulnerable, just like the girls in Maria's files. "I think you should leave," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. Dr. Morrison nodded, still smiling that terrible, empty smile. "Of course. But, Elena, may I call you Elena? I hope you'll think carefully about what you've discovered here today. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, for everyone's safety." He turned and walked back toward the SUV, leaving Elena alone with the photographs, the medical equipment, and the growing certainty that her sister's car accident had been anything but accidental. Elena stood frozen in the storage unit doorway until the black SUV disappeared into the shimmering heat, her heart still hammering against her ribs. Only when the sound of the engine faded completely did she allow herself to move, quickly rolling down the metal door and securing it with the new lock she'd brought. Her hands shook as she turned the key, the click echoing in the oppressive silence of the facility. The drive back to her apartment took 45 minutes through San Antonio's crawling traffic, but Elena barely noticed the honking horns or the sun beating mercilessly through her Honda's failing air conditioning. Dr. Morrison's words played on repeat in her mind. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, for everyone's safety. The way he'd looked at her belly, like he was already calculating its value. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. "Can you pick up an extra shift tomorrow?" Jenny called out sick. Elena stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. She needed the money. God knew she needed every extra dollar before the baby came. But the thought of pretending everything was normal, of smiling at worried parents and cooing over patients while Maria's secrets burned in her chest, felt impossible. Can't tomorrow. Family stuff. She hit send before she could change her mind. Elena pulled into the parking lot of Sunset Gardens, the subsidized housing complex she'd called home for the past 2 years. The cheerful name couldn't disguise what it really was, a collection of aging buildings where people like her scraped by, month to month, hoping nothing catastrophic would tip them over the edge into real poverty. Her one-bedroom unit on the second floor had seemed like a blessing when she'd gotten approved. Now, carrying Maria's secrets up those concrete stairs, it felt like a target. Inside, the apartment's familiar shabbiness usually comforted her. The second-hand furniture she'd carefully chosen, the baby clothes folded in neat piles on every available surface, the crib she'd assembled herself using YouTube videos and stubborn determination. Tonight, though, she found herself checking the locks twice and pulling the thin curtains closed against the evening light. Elena lowered herself carefully onto the couch, her back aching from the day's tension. At 7 months pregnant, her body had become both fortress and burden, protecting the life inside while reminding her hourly of her vulnerability. She pressed her hands to her belly, feeling her daughter's restless movements. "What did your aunt get us into, little one?" she whispered. The question hung in the air unanswered. Elena had built her entire adult life around creating safety and stability, first as a pediatric nurse, then in preparing for single motherhood with methodical precision. Her apartment might be small, but every corner held evidence of her careful planning. Baby books stacked on the coffee table, their pages filled with her neat notes. A hospital bag packed and ready by the door, a folder of important documents organized with color-coded tabs. She'd even practiced the route to the hospital 3 times, timing it at different hours to account for traffic. Because if there was one thing Elena Vasquez refused to be, it was unprepared. She'd seen too many families blindsided by crisis, watched too many parents discover that love alone wasn't enough to protect their children. But Maria's storage unit had revealed the brutal truth. Sometimes preparation meant nothing when the danger came from directions you'd never thought to guard against. Elena's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Carmen's name flashed on the screen, her closest friend from work, one of the few people who'd stuck around when Elena's pregnancy had cost her the social life she'd barely managed to maintain. "Hey, girl. How'd it go today? Did you find anything valuable?" Elena closed her eyes. Carmen's cheerful voice, a painful reminder of the normal life that felt suddenly distant. "Not exactly. Just old stuff. Nothing I can really use." "That's too bad. I know you were hoping for something to help with baby expenses." A pause. "You sound weird, though. Everything okay?" "My dead sister was trafficking babies, and now the people she worked with are threatening me." The words formed in Elena's mind, but couldn't make it to her lips. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? How could she drag Carmen into whatever darkness had swallowed Maria? "Just tired," Elena said instead. "Long day, you know how it is." Carmen's tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, don't forget we have that baby shower planning meeting tomorrow. Sarah's house, 7 o'clock. And before you even think about cancelling, you're not getting out of letting us celebrate this little girl." Elena had forgotten about the baby shower entirely. The idea of sitting in Sarah's pristine living room, opening gifts and playing games while Maria's files burned in her memory, felt surreal. But maybe that was exactly what she needed. A few hours of forced normalcy, a reminder of the life she was fighting to protect. "I'll be there," she promised. After Carmen hung up, Elena sat in the growing darkness, one hand on her belly and the other clutching her phone. Tomorrow she would smile and pretend to be excited about diaper cakes and baby name games. But tonight, she needed to decide what to do with the terrible knowledge Maria had left behind. The decision came at 3:17 a.m. when Elena's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She'd been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling while her daughter performed what felt like gymnastics routines against her ribs. Every sound from the parking lot below made her tense, a car door slamming, footsteps on concrete, the distant hum of late-night traffic. When the phone lit up beside her, Elena's heart lurched. "We know you were there today. Some things are better left alone. Think of your baby." Elena sat up so fast her vision spotted. The message had no sender identification, just those 17 words that turned her blood to ice water. With shaking fingers, she screenshotted the text, then immediately deleted it from her phone, though she knew that wouldn't make it disappear from wherever else it might be stored. Her daughter kicked hard, as if responding to Elena's spike of adrenaline. Elena pressed her hands to her belly, whispering automatic reassurances while her mind raced. They had her phone number. They knew where she'd been, probably knew where she lived. Dr. Morrison's silk-wrapped threat suddenly felt much more immediate. Elena padded to the kitchen and filled a glass with water, her hands still trembling. The normal sounds of her apartment, the refrigerator's hum, the upstairs neighbor's television through thin walls, felt different now. Less like home, more like a trap waiting to spring. She could call the police, tell them about Maria's storage unit, about Dr. Morrison's visit, about the threatening text. But what would she tell them exactly? That her sister might have been involved in something illegal, that a well-dressed doctor had spoken to her politely but menacingly, that someone had sent her a vague text that could be interpreted as either concern or threat. Elena knew enough about the system to understand how it would play out. Maria was dead, conveniently unable to defend herself. Any investigation would focus on the victims, those terrified, undocumented girls whose trust Maria had betrayed. They would be the ones who suffered while people like Dr. Morrison disappeared behind expensive lawyers and legitimate practices. But the alternative was worse. Elena returned to her bedroom and pulled out her laptop, settling carefully against the pillows. The screen's blue glow felt harsh in the darkness as she opened a new browser window and searched for Dr. Kenneth Morrison. The results were immediately suspicious in their perfection: a pristine practice website, a few generic medical directory listings, professional photos that looked like stock photography. No news articles, no patient reviews, no digital footprint suggesting he'd ever treated actual patients. She tried variations of the name, cross-referenced with San Antonio medical facilities, even searched for the black SUV's partial license plate she'd managed to memorize. Nothing. Dr. Kenneth Morrison might as well be a ghost. Elena's daughter shifted restlessly, and she found herself wondering if the baby could sense her fear. In her work as a pediatric nurse, she'd seen how stress affected pregnant mothers and their children. She'd counseled countless women about the importance of staying calm, of protecting themselves to protect their babies. Now she was facing an impossible choice: stay silent and hope they left her alone, or fight back and risk everything. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Carmen, and Elena realized with a start that it was nearly 4 a.m. Her friend never called this late unless something was seriously wrong. "Elena? Thank God you answered." Carmen's voice was tight with anxiety. "I'm at the hospital. I've been trying to reach you for an hour." Elena's throat constricted. "What happened? Are you okay?" "It's not me, it's Sarah." Carmen's words came in a rush. "Someone broke into her house tonight. She's okay, but Elena..." "They didn't take anything. They just trashed her living room and left a note. A note asking about you." The glass of water slipped from Elena's numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. The note said, "Tell Elena Vasquez some family legacies are too dangerous to claim." "Elena, what the hell is going on?" "Sarah's terrified to even be in the same room as me because I'm your friend." Elena stared at the broken glass, watching water spread across the floor in dark rivulets. Sarah, sweet, anxious Sarah, who organized charity drives and worried about using the wrong color napkins for dinner parties. Sarah, who had volunteered to host the baby shower, who had spent weeks planning games and decorations. Now she was in the hospital because of Elena's connection to Maria's secrets. "I have to go," Elena whispered. "Elena, wait." But Elena was already hanging up, her mind crystallizing around a single, terrible certainty: this wasn't going away. Dr. Morrison and whoever he worked with weren't going to be satisfied with veiled threats. They were escalating, drawing her friends into danger, proving they could reach anyone in her life whenever they chose. Elena looked down at her belly, at the child who would be born into whatever world she created in the next few hours. She thought about the photographs in Maria's storage unit, all those babies whose mothers had trusted the wrong person. She thought about the files documenting systematic exploitation of the most vulnerable people in her city. And she thought about Sarah, kind and harmless, lying in a hospital bed because Elena had inherited more than belongings from her dead sister. The choice, when it came, felt less like a decision than a recognition of something that had already happened the moment she'd cut the lock on that storage unit door. Elena reached for her laptop and began to type. Elena stared at the blank document, cursor blinking like a heartbeat against the white screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type what? A confession? A plea for help? An explanation that would somehow make sense of the nightmare Maria had left behind? Subject: information regarding illegal adoption network. She typed the words, then immediately deleted them. Too direct, too dangerous. These people had already proven they could reach her friends, could turn her life inside out with surgical precision. What would they do if she actually tried to expose them? Elena's daughter kicked hard against her ribs, and she pressed her hand to the spot, trying to calm both of them. "I know, baby. I know this is scary." The laptop screen dimmed, then brightened again as the cursor waited. Elena found herself thinking about her last conversation with Maria 3 months before the accident. They'd fought about money. Again. Elena had asked for help with medical bills, and Maria had launched into her usual lecture about personal responsibility and making better choices. "You think having a baby on your own makes you some kind of hero," Maria had snapped over the phone. "You're just another statistic. Another single mother who'll spend her life struggling while her kid pays the price." Elena had hung up angry, wounded by her sister's cruelty. Now she wondered if Maria's harshness had been protection, a way to keep Elena distant from whatever darkness she'd been swimming in. Had Maria been trying to save her? Elena Vasquez, RN at Children's Hospital of San Antonio, has information regarding suspicious adoption practices. Delete. Delete again. The problem wasn't just the words, it was everything that came after. Once she sent this message, whoever received it would need proof. They'd want Elena to return to the storage unit, to gather evidence, to build a case. They'd want her to become a witness, maybe even testify. And all the while, Dr. Morrison and his associates would be watching, waiting, calculating how much damage she could do. Elena pushed herself up from the bed and walked to the window, pulling back the corner of the curtain just enough to peer out at the parking lot below. Everything looked normal. The same collection of aging cars, the same broken security light that had been flickering for months, the same pothole that the management company kept promising to fix. But normal was an illusion now. Those files in Maria's storage unit proved that horrors could hide behind the most mundane facades. How many of those babies in the photographs had been born in ordinary-looking places to mothers who thought they were receiving help? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your friend is home safe." This time, Elena's hands started shaking so violently she almost dropped the phone. They were watching her right now, probably monitoring her calls and texts. They knew she'd talked to Carmen. They knew about Sarah's attack and Elena's reaction to it. Most terrifying of all, they seemed to know that Elena was sitting in her apartment at 4 a.m., wrestling with exactly the kind of decision that would threaten their operation. The cursor kept blinking. Patient, relentless. Elena thought about the teenage girls in Maria's files. Girls who'd trusted a woman they thought would help them. Isabella Moreno, 16 and pregnant and terrified of deportation. How desperate must she have been to accept Maria's offer? How completely must she have believed that she was saving her baby by giving it away? And what had happened to Isabella after? Had she been allowed to hold her child even for a moment? Had she been given any choice at all in where the baby went? Or had Maria and Dr. Morrison simply taken what they wanted, leaving another broken girl to pick up the pieces of her life? Elena's laptop dinged softly with a low battery warning. Soon it would shut down automatically, taking her moment of terrible possibility with it. She could let it happen. Close the computer, go back to bed, pretend this night had never occurred. In the morning, she could pack a bag and drive somewhere far from San Antonio. Start over in a new city with a new name, have her baby in anonymity and safety. But she'd still know. Every time she looked at her daughter, she'd remember the faces in those photographs. Every news story about missing children would feel like an accusation. And somewhere, Dr. Morrison would still be destroying families, still preying on the desperate and vulnerable. Elena's daughter moved restlessly inside her, and for a moment she could swear she felt tiny hands pressing against her belly from the inside, like the baby was trying to reach out, to touch the world she'd soon be born into. I can't do this alone, Elena realized. I can't be the person who stands up to these monsters. The thought brought relief so sharp it was almost physical. She wasn't a hero. She was a pregnant nurse who barely made ends meet, who lived in subsidized housing and bought generic groceries and counted every dollar. What could someone like her possibly do against people with enough power to make car accidents happen and enough money to make doctors disappear from the internet? The cursor blinked, waited. Elena closed the laptop. The apartment felt different in the darkness after Elena closed the laptop. Smaller somehow, as if the walls had crept closer while she'd wrestled with her decision. She sat motionless on her bed, the warm metal of the computer heavy against her thighs, listening to the silence that pressed against her eardrums like water. But silence, Elena realized, wasn't the same as peace. Her daughter shifted restlessly inside her, tiny limbs stretching against the confines of Elena's belly. The movement brought a sharp kick just below her ribs, and Elena found herself placing both hands over the spot, feeling the solid reality of the life she carried. "What kind of world am I bringing you into?" she whispered to her belly, the words barely audible in the dark room. As if in response, another kick came, stronger this time, insistent. Elena had read enough pregnancy books to know that babies could sense their mother's stress, that cortisol and adrenaline crossed the placental barrier as surely as oxygen and nutrients. She'd counseled enough expectant mothers at the hospital about staying calm for their baby's sake. But sitting in the darkness with Maria's secrets burning in her memory and Dr. Morrison's threats echoing in her ears, Elena felt anything but calm. The phone screen had gone dark, but she could still see those words burned into her retinas. "Your friend is home safe." This time, Sarah was home now, probably awake and terrified, jumping at every sound. Carmen would be with her, trying to make sense of why someone had targeted Elena's friend. And Elena was supposed to just, what? Go to sleep, pretend tomorrow's baby shower planning meeting was still happening, act like her life hadn't been shattered by the discovery of her sister's crimes. Elena pushed herself up from the bed, her body protesting the movement. 7 months pregnant, and every position felt wrong now. Sitting hurt her back, standing made her feet swell, lying down left her breathless. She walked to the kitchenette, stepping carefully around the broken glass she still hadn't cleaned up, and filled another glass with water. The digital clock on the microwave read 4:47 a.m. In a few hours, the sun would rise on another oppressively hot Texas day. Elena would have to call in sick to work. There was no way she could focus on caring for pediatric patients, while Dr. Morrison's threats hung over her head. She'd have to cancel the baby shower planning, come up with some excuse that wouldn't worry Carmen further. She'd have to pretend everything was normal while knowing it never would be again. Elena's reflection caught in the dark window above the sink, ghostly and distorted. She barely recognized herself. When had her face become so drawn, her eyes so hollow? When had fear carved such deep lines around her mouth? A car door slammed in the parking lot below, and Elena flinched so hard she nearly dropped her water glass. She forced herself to breathe, to count to 10, to remember that normal life continued even when your world had been turned upside down. People came home from late shifts, teenagers returned from dates. Not every sound was a threat. But as Elena stood at her kitchen window, looking down at the empty parking lot, she realized something had fundamentally shifted inside her. The woman who had closed that laptop 5 minutes ago, the woman who had chosen safety over justice, silence over action, that woman felt like a stranger. Because Elena kept thinking about Isabella Moreno. 16 years old, pregnant, and so desperate for help that she'd trusted Maria. What had that moment been like when Isabella realized her baby was gone forever? When she understood that the woman who'd promised to help had instead stolen the most precious thing in her world? Elena's daughter kicked again, a sharp reminder of her presence. And suddenly, Elena could picture her own child at 16, vulnerable, scared, in need of protection. Could picture some other predator, looking at her daughter and seeing opportunity instead of humanity. "I can't let that happen," Elena said aloud to her reflection in the dark window. "I can't let them keep doing this." The words hung in the air, and Elena felt something settle inside her chest. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. The kind of clarity that came not from courage, but from the simple recognition that some choices made themselves. She thought about Maria's journal, still sitting in that storage unit with all its documented horrors. She thought about the photographs of babies whose faces would haunt her forever if she did nothing. She thought about Dr. Morrison's confident smile and his silk-wrapped threats. Elena walked back to her bed and opened the laptop. Her hands didn't shake this time as she began to type. The words came slowly at first, then faster, spilling onto the screen like water through a broken dam. She wrote about Maria's storage unit, about the files and photographs, about Dr. Morrison's visit and the threats that followed. She wrote about Sarah's attack and the messages on her phone. When she finished, Elena stared at the email for a long moment before typing the recipient address, the FBI's tip line. Then, before she could change her mind again, she pressed send. The email disappeared into the digital void with a soft touche, and Elena stared at the empty screen, feeling simultaneously hollow and electric. Her laptop's fan hummed softly in the silence, the only sound besides her own ragged breathing and the distant hum of the air conditioner fighting against the Texas heat. It's done. The thought brought no relief, only a strange sense of falling, like stepping off a cliff in the dark, unable to see what waited below. Elena closed the laptop with shaking hands and set it aside, then sat perfectly still on her bed, waiting to feel different. Waiting to feel brave or foolish, or anything other than the numb terror that had settled in her bones. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "We're disappointed in your choice, Elena, but we're patient people." The message arrived exactly 3 minutes after she'd hit send. 3 minutes. They hadn't just been watching her apartment, they'd been monitoring her internet activity in real time. The violation of it made her stomach clench, made her want to throw the phone across the room and scrub her skin raw. Instead, Elena forced herself to screenshot the message before it could disappear. Evidence. If she was really doing this, if she was really going to war against people who could orchestrate car accidents and monitor FBI tip lines, then she needed to document everything. Another message appeared. Check your email. Elena's hands were trembling again as she reopened her laptop. The FBI tip line had already responded with an automated acknowledgement, promising that her submission would be reviewed within 48 to 72 hours. But there was another message waiting, this one from an address she didn't recognize, elenas-guardian-angel at protonmail.com. Don't trust the FBI tip line. They have people inside. If you're serious about stopping them, meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. Sunrise Diner on West Commerce. Come alone. Tell no one. Someone who knew Maria. Elena read the message 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she could feel it in her throat. Another trap? Another player in whatever sick game had gotten Maria killed? Or was this someone who could actually help her navigate the nightmare she'd stumbled into? The smart thing would be to ignore it. Delete the email, turn off her phone, pack a bag and disappear before the sun came up. She had enough savings for a bus ticket to anywhere, enough skills to find work in any city. She could have her baby in anonymity, raise her daughter far from San Antonio and whatever shadows Maria had unleashed. But even as Elena considered escape, she knew it was an illusion. People like Dr. Morrison didn't just forget about problems, they solved them. And a pregnant woman who'd seen their files, who'd already contacted the FBI, who carried her sister's DNA and might know more than she'd revealed. Elena would never be safe as long as she remained a loose end. Her daughter kicked again, a strong flutter that seemed to say, "I'm here. I'm real. I'm counting on you." Elena pressed her palm to the spot, feeling the solid presence of the life she'd created. In 3 months, this baby would be born into whatever world Elena shaped in the next few days. Would it be a world where monsters like Dr. Morrison operated with impunity? Where girls like Isabella Moreno disappeared without consequence? Where fear silenced anyone who might speak truth to power? Someone who knew Maria. The words echoed in Elena's mind as she stared at the email address. Maria, who died in a convenient accident just as she'd started to have second thoughts about her involvement. Maria, who'd kept detailed records hidden in a storage unit, as if she'd known she might need evidence someday. Maria, who'd pushed Elena away in those final months. Not out of cruelty, maybe, but out of protection. Had her sister been planning to expose the network? Had someone else been helping her? The questions multiplied in Elena's exhausted mind, each possibility more dangerous than the last. Dawn was breaking outside her window, painting the parking lot in shades of grey and gold. Soon her neighbors would be leaving for work, children would be boarding school buses, the normal rhythms of life would resume. But Elena's world had shifted onto a different axis entirely, one where anonymous emails arrived in the dark and meetings with strangers might be her only path forward. She looked down at her belly, at the curve where her daughter was growing strong and safe. "We're in this together now," she whispered. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Elena closed the laptop and finally swept up the broken glass from her water tumbler, the mundane task oddly grounding after everything that had happened. When she finished, she sat back down on her bed and began to make a list of everything she knew, everyone she suspected, every piece of evidence she could remember from Maria's files. If she was walking into a trap tomorrow at the Sunrise Diner, at least she'd be walking in prepared. Elena spent the morning hours that followed in a strange state of suspended animation, moving through the motions of normalcy while her mind raced through possibilities and preparations. She called in sick to work, her voice hoarse enough that the charge nurse didn't question it. She texted Carmen to postpone the baby shower planning, claiming exhaustion, which wasn't entirely a lie. But as the day wore on, the weight of her decision pressed down like the oppressive Texas heat that no amount of air conditioning could fully banish. Elena found herself pacing her small apartment, moving from window to window, checking and rechecking the parking lot below. Every car that lingered too long, every person who walked past without obvious purpose, every shadow that didn't belong, all of it felt loaded with threat. At noon, she sat at her kitchen table with the handwritten list she'd made, studying the names and details she'd managed to remember from Maria's files. Dr. Morrison was the obvious center, but Elena was certain he wasn't working alone. The speed of their responses, the coordination of their surveillance, the reach they seemed to have into legitimate institutions, this was bigger than one corrupt doctor. She thought about the adoption attorney whose business card she'd found in Maria's collection, about the clinic director who'd signed off on falsified medical records, about the social worker who'd somehow expedited paperwork that should have taken months. Each name represented another person who'd looked at desperate, frightened girls and seen profit instead of humanity. Elena's daughter had been unusually active all morning, stretching and shifting as if she could sense her mother's agitation. During one particularly strong series of movements, Elena found herself talking to her belly, something she'd always felt self-conscious about before, but which now seemed like the most natural thing in the world. "Your Aunt Maria made some terrible choices," she said softly, her hands resting on the curve of her stomach. "But I think maybe she was trying to make it right at the end, and now it's up to us to finish what she started." The baby's response was a gentle flutter, almost like agreement. Elena chose to interpret it that way at least. She needed all the allies she could get, even tiny ones who wouldn't be born for another 2 months. As 1:30 approached, Elena began her preparations in earnest. She dressed carefully in loose-fitting clothes that wouldn't restrict her movement, chose shoes she could walk quickly in if necessary. She charged her phone fully and made sure the ringer was on. Most importantly, she copied all the photos she'd taken of Maria's files onto a cloud storage account, then forwarded the access information to her own work email with instructions to contact the FBI if anything happened to her. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it was something. The drive to West Commerce Street felt both endless and too short. Elena's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, and she found herself taking deep breaths to stay calm. The baby seemed to sense her anxiety, responding with restless movements that made it hard to focus on the road. The Sunrise Diner sat in a strip of aging businesses that had seen better decades: a tax preparation service, a pawn shop, a store that sold quinceañera dresses in shades of pink and purple that seemed to glow in the harsh afternoon light. Elena drove past once, studying the layout, checking for obvious surveillance, looking for escape routes. The parking lot was half empty, most of the lunch crowd already gone. She parked where she could see the entrance but also had a clear path to the street. Before getting out of her car, Elena sent a final text to Carmen: "If you don't hear from me by 5 p.m. today, call the police. Tell them to check the Sunrise Diner on West Commerce and contact the FBI about Maria's files." She almost sent it. Her finger hovered over the button for a long moment before she deleted the message instead. Carmen was already worried enough about Sarah's attack. Elena couldn't drag her deeper into this nightmare. not when she had her own family to protect. Inside the diner, the air conditioning fought a losing battle against the heat radiating from the kitchen. Elena chose a booth near the back where she could see both the entrance and the rear exit, ordered coffee she didn't want, and waited. Her watch showed 1:58 p.m. At exactly 2, a woman walked in. Mid-40s, dark hair streaked with premature grey, wearing scrubs that marked her as medical personnel. She looked around the diner with careful eyes before approaching Elena's table. "Elena Vasquez?" the woman asked quietly. Elena nodded, her throat suddenly too dry to speak. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I was supposed to be working with your sister the night she died." The woman slid into the booth across from Elena, her expression grim. "We need to talk about what Maria discovered, and why they killed her for it." Elena's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down, the small sound seeming to echo in the diner's afternoon quiet. Dr. Chen's words hung between them like a loaded weapon, the night she died, confirming what Elena had known in her bones but hadn't dared voice aloud. "You said you were supposed to be working with her," Elena managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Working on what?" Dr. Chen glanced around the diner, then leaned forward. "Maria contacted me 6 weeks before the accident. She'd been keeping records, photographs, documents, names. She wanted help getting everything to the right authorities without getting herself killed in the process." The doctor's laugh was bitter. "We were both naive enough to think there was a safe way to do it." Elena's hands moved instinctively to her belly as her daughter kicked hard. "Why should I trust you? For all I know, you're working with Morrison." "Because if I was, you'd already be dead." Dr. Chen's bluntness hit like a physical blow. "Morrison's people don't play games, Elena. They don't send threatening messages or stage warning attacks. When they decide you're too dangerous to live, they arrange accidents. Quick, clean, permanent." The baby kicked again, and this time, Elena couldn't hide her wince. Dr. Chen's expression immediately shifted from grim to concerned, her medical training taking over. "How far along are you?" she asked. 30 weeks. Elena found herself oddly grateful for the momentary shift to medical territory, something concrete and manageable. Due in early October. Any complications? High blood pressure? Unusual swelling? "No, Why does it matter?" Dr. Chen's face darkened. "Because you're exactly what they're looking for. A healthy pregnant woman with no family support system, under extreme stress, facing financial difficulties." Maria's files weren't just about what they'd already done. They were documenting their target acquisition process. The words hit Elena like ice water. Target acquisition. As if she and her unborn daughter were nothing more than merchandise to be evaluated and processed. Her hands tightened protectively over her belly. "That's why they're not rushing to eliminate you," Dr. Chen continued relentlessly. "You're worth more to them alive, at least until October. After that..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena felt the world tilting around her. The diner's fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, the air too thin. "You're saying they killed Maria to keep her quiet, but they're keeping me alive because they want my baby?" "I'm saying Maria discovered something that made her an immediate threat. She found out they weren't just facilitating illegal adoptions, they were expanding, building a network across 3 states. Your sister was small time compared to what Morrison has planned." The coffee Elena hadn't wanted turned to acid in her stomach. What did she find? Dr. Chen reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table. Construction permits, medical equipment orders, immigration documents. Maria photographed everything before they cleaned out her storage unit. "Cleaned out?" Elena's voice cracked. "But I was just there yesterday." The real storage unit, the one she paid for under an assumed name, where she kept the evidence that would have destroyed Morrison's entire operation. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "They found it the same night they killed her. What you saw was the decoy, just enough documentation to keep you busy and make you think you'd found everything." Elena stared at the envelope, afraid to touch it. Everything she thought she'd known, every decision she'd made based on the horrors in Maria's staged storage unit, had been based on incomplete information. She was playing a game where she didn't even know the rules, let alone the stakes. "Why didn't you go to the FBI yourself?" Elena asked. "I tried. 3 months ago, the agent I spoke with promised a full investigation." Dr. Chen's smile was bitter. 2 weeks later, Morrison sent me photos of my daughter's elementary school, her schedule, her walking route home. The message was clear. Elena's daughter kicked again, stronger this time, as if responding to the conversation about threatened children. The movement was both comfort and reminder. She wasn't just fighting for principle anymore, she was fighting for the life growing inside her. "So, what do you want from me?" Maria had a backup plan. She was going to contact a federal prosecutor in Houston, someone Morrison's people hadn't gotten to yet. She never got the chance, but Dr. Chen tapped the envelope. "Everything you need is in here. Names, phone numbers, copies of the real evidence. But it has to come from you, Elena. You're her sister, her next of kin. Your testimony carries weight, theirs doesn't." Elena looked down at the envelope, then back at Dr. Chen's face. "And if I say no?" "Then in October, you'll disappear. Your baby will be sold to the highest bidder, and girls like Isabella Moreno will keep vanishing into a system that treats them like livestock." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and Elena realized her hands were shaking. Elena's hands closed around the envelope, the manila paper rough beneath her trembling fingers. For a moment, she felt a spark of hope. Real evidence. A federal prosecutor, beyond Morrison's reach. A chance to end this nightmare properly. But as she lifted the envelope, something felt wrong. Too light, too thin. She opened it with growing dread. Empty. Completely empty except for a single photograph. Elena herself, taken through her apartment window just that morning as she'd dressed for this meeting. "I'm sorry," Dr. Chen whispered, and when Elena looked up, she saw tears in the woman's eyes. "They have my daughter. They took her from school an hour ago. Said they'd kill her if I didn't." The diner door chimed, and Dr. Morrison walked in, flanked by 2 men Elena didn't recognize. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who owned everything in his sight, nodding pleasantly to the waitress as if this were a social call. "Elena," he said, sliding into the booth beside Dr. Chen, who had gone pale as death. "I'm disappointed. Dr. Chen was supposed to convince you to be reasonable, not fill your head with more fantasies about playing hero." Elena's daughter kicked frantically, as if sensing the danger radiating from the man across the table. Elena pressed both hands to her belly, her mind racing through impossible calculations. How fast she could move, how far she could get, whether the other diners would help or just watch. "Your sister was stubborn too," Morrison continued conversationally, "right up until the end, even when I explained that cooperation would mean a clean death instead of, well, let's just say car accidents can be arranged to be very slow, very painful affairs." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Maria's last moments, trapped and terrified, knowing exactly who had orchestrated her murder and why. The coffee cup shattered in Elena's grip, hot liquid splashing across the table, but she barely noticed the burning on her skin. "The federal prosecutor Dr. Chen mentioned?" Morrison pulled out his phone, showed Elena a photo of a middle-aged man in handcuffs being led away by police. "Arrested this morning on charges of accepting bribes. Turns out he's been taking money from drug cartels for years. Amazing what kind of evidence can surface when you know where to look." Elena felt something breaking inside her chest, hope crumbling like glass. Every avenue, every possible escape route, every person who might have helped, Morrison had anticipated it all. The tip line she'd contacted, the evidence he'd gathered, even this meeting, all of it had been part of his design. "Sarah Chen's daughter is currently safe," Morrison continued, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. "As long as Sarah continues to cooperate, the girl will remain that way. Children are so vulnerable, don't you think? Especially when their parents make poor choices." Dr. Chen was crying silently now, her shoulders shaking. Elena realized with sick clarity that this woman had never been her ally. She'd been another victim, another parent forced to choose between conscience and her child's life, just like Elena was being forced to choose now. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison said. You're going to give me your phone. You're going to return everything you took from Maria's storage unit. You're going to move into a facility where we can monitor your health for the remainder of your pregnancy. And in October, after your daughter is born and placed with a loving family who can provide for her properly, you're going to disappear quietly. Elena's vision blurred with rage and terror. Go to hell. Morrison smiled, pulling out a tablet and swiping to a video feed. Elena's heart stopped. Carmen's house, Carmen's children playing in their backyard, completely unaware they were being watched. Your friend has a beautiful family, Morrison observed. Be a shame if something happened to them because you couldn't see reason. House fires are so tragic, especially when they happen at night, when whole families are asleep. Elena's daughter kicked desperately, and she realized she was hyperventilating, her vision starting to tunnel. This was how they won, not just through violence, but through the systematic destruction of everything their victims cared about. Maria had fought them and died. Dr. Chen was fighting them, and her daughter had been kidnapped. Now Carmen's entire family hung in the balance of Elena's decision. I need to think, Elena gasped. No, Morrison said simply. You need to choose, now. Your phone, Elena. Elena looked at Dr. Chen's tear-streaked face, at Morrison's patient smile, at the photo of Carmen's children frozen on the tablet screen. Her daughter's frantic movements felt like pleas, like apologies for a future that would never come to pass. With shaking hands, Elena placed her phone on the table. Morrison's smile widened as his fingers closed around Elena's phone, but something in his expression shifted when he looked at the screen. His thumb moved across the surface, swiping and tapping, his satisfaction gradually giving way to confusion, then concern. What is this? He demanded, turning the phone toward Elena. On the screen was a live video feed. Morrison himself, sitting in the diner booth, clearly visible and speaking. The timestamp showed it had been broadcasting for the past 12 minutes, streaming to multiple platforms simultaneously. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but for the first time since entering the diner, she felt something other than terror. Maria wasn't just keeping records, she said, her voice steadier than she'd expected. She was building a network. People who cared about what was happening to those girls. Morrison's face had gone white. You're bluffing. There's no way. Carmen helped me set it up this morning, Elena continued, the lie flowing smoothly from her lips. Streaming app, triggered by a panic button. Everything you just said about my sister's murder, about Dr. Chen's daughter, about the federal prosecutor, it's all being broadcast live to the FBI field office, the San Antonio Police Department, and about 3,000 social media followers. Dr. Chen's head snapped up, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since Morrison had arrived. Elena prayed the woman wouldn't give her away. There was no streaming app, no live feed, no network of Maria's allies waiting in the wings. But Morrison didn't know that, and the longer Elena could keep him believing otherwise, the better her chances of getting out of this diner alive. Morrison was frantically trying to stop whatever he thought was broadcasting, his fingers flying over the phone's surface. Turn it off, now. I can't, Elena said. Carmen has remote access. The only way to stop the stream is with a code word that tells her I'm safe, and if I don't send that code word by 3 o'clock... Elena glanced at her watch. 2:47 p.m. She goes public with everything. Photos from Maria's storage unit, bank records, client lists, all of it. It wasn't true. Carmen knew nothing about any of this, and Elena's phone was exactly what it appeared to be, just a phone with some photos she'd taken yesterday. But Morrison's panicked expression suggested he was buying the deception, at least for now. One of Morrison's men leaned close to whisper something in his ear, and Morrison's face went from white to ashen grey. Elena couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Morrison's eyes dart toward the diner's windows, then toward the exit. Sir, the man said louder now, we need to leave. There are federal vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Elena's breath caught. That couldn't be true, could it? She'd sent no signals, made no calls. But through the diner's grease-stained windows, she could see dark SUVs taking positions around the building, and men in tactical gear, moving with the precise choreography of a planned operation. Morrison grabbed Dr. Chen's arm, hauling her out of the booth. "If this is some kind of setup—" "It's not," Dr. Chen gasped. "Elena, I swear, I had nothing to do with—" The diner's front door burst open, and federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn, voices shouting commands Elena couldn't process over the roaring in her ears. She found herself pushed down against the table, hands covering her head as chaos erupted around her. But in that moment of terror and confusion, one truth crystallized with absolute clarity. Morrison's operation was bigger than she'd ever imagined, and someone had been watching the watchers. Maria's network wasn't a desperate fabrication. It was real. Her sister hadn't been working alone at the end, and Elena wasn't alone now. As the shouts and commotion continued around her, Elena felt her daughter's movements slow from frantic kicks to gentle, reassuring pushes against her ribs. For the first time in days, those movements felt like hope instead of desperation. The revelation hit her like lightning. Maria hadn't just been documenting Morrison's crimes in those final weeks. She'd been building a case with federal investigators who were already watching him, feeding them information from the inside while pretending to be his willing accomplice. The storage unit Elena had found wasn't a decoy. It was exactly what Maria had intended her to find. Evidence, yes, but more importantly, a trigger that would set larger events in motion. Elena wasn't inheriting her sister's fight. She was completing Maria's carefully orchestrated plan to bring down everyone who had turned desperate women and innocent children into commodities to be bought and sold. The truth washed over her in waves. Maria had died to protect this operation, and Elena's discovery of the storage unit had been the final piece of evidence the FBI needed to move against Morrison's entire network. Elena remained pressed against the sticky diner table as federal agents secured the scene around her, her heart still racing from the chaos of the arrest. Through the forest of tactical boots and shouted commands, she caught glimpses of Morrison being led away in handcuffs, his earlier confidence replaced by the pale shock of a man whose carefully constructed empire had just crumbled in real time. "Ma'am? Elena Vasquez?" A woman's voice cut through the din, calm and professional. Elena looked up to see a tall agent with graying temples and kind eyes crouching beside the booth. "I'm Special Agent Patricia Reeves, FBI. Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. Her daughter had settled into what felt like exhausted calm, tiny limbs no longer thrashing in panic. The agent's gaze moved to Elena's pregnant belly with the practiced assessment of someone who understood exactly what stakes had been at play. "We need to get you checked out by a medic," Agent Reeves said. "But first, I want you to know, your sister was one of the bravest people I've ever worked with. What just happened here, what's happening across 3 states right now as we speak, none of it would have been possible without Maria's courage." The words hit Elena like warm water after being trapped in ice. She was really working with you. For 8 months. Ever since she witnessed Morrison's people take a baby from a 16-year-old girl who'd just given birth in the back of a van. Agent Reeves helped Elena sit up properly, her movements gentle but efficient. Maria contacted our field office the next day, said she couldn't live with what she'd seen, but she also couldn't just walk away and leave other women to face the same fate. Elena watched through the window as Dr. Chen was being interviewed by agents near one of the SUVs, no longer the terrified woman who'd sat across from her 20 minutes ago. "Is her daughter really safe?" "Jennifer Chen is fine. She's with her grandmother right now, probably wondering why she got picked up from school early for ice cream." Agent Reeves followed Elena's gaze. "Dr. Chen has been feeding Morrison false information for us for 2 months, ever since we recovered his people's attempt to kidnap her daughter. The fear you saw from her today, that was real, but not for the reasons Morrison thought." Elena felt something shifting in her chest, a loosening of the vice that had been crushing her ribs since this nightmare began. The federal prosecutor who was arrested? Also part of the operation. Amazing how realistic mugshots can look when you have the right photographers and a cooperative subject. Agent Reeves smiled grimly. Morrison's network relied on controlling information, making people feel isolated and powerless. The best way to defeat that was to make him believe his own intelligence network was still intact while we systematically dismantled everything around him. Elena's mind raced through the implications. How many women? How many babies? We're still calculating the full scope, but we executed warrants this morning on facilities in Houston, Austin, and Dallas. 17 women currently in various stages of pregnancy, all being held against their will. 23 infants recovered from what Morrison called transitional care facilities. Agent Reeves paused. And 34 families who thought they were adopting legally are about to learn they were unwitting participants in human trafficking. The numbers felt too big to process, too horrific to absorb all at once. Elena found herself thinking of Isabella Moreno, wondering if the girl had been among those 17 women, if Maria's death might still mean Isabella's survival. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now you go home," Agent Reeves said. "You take care of yourself and your daughter. You let us handle the prosecutions and the trials and the paperwork. You've done enough." But even as the agent spoke, Elena felt something crystallizing inside her, a clarity that had nothing to do with relief and everything to do with purpose. "Those women you recovered, they'll need medical care, advocacy, people who understand what they've been through." Agent Reeves studied Elena's face with the expression of someone recognizing a familiar determination. "Elena, you're 7 months pregnant. You've been through traumatic experiences. You should focus on—" "My sister died for this," Elena interrupted. "Not just to stop Morrison, but to help women who had nowhere else to turn. That doesn't end with arrests." Elena's daughter shifted inside her, a gentle rolling movement that felt less like distress and more like agreement. For the first time since finding Maria's storage unit, Elena understood what her sister had really left her, not just evidence of crimes, but a legacy of choosing to act when action seemed impossible. Agent Reeves handed Elena a business card. "Call me when you're ready. There are going to be a lot of women who need someone who understands what it means to fight for your child's future." Elena pocketed the card, feeling its weight like a promise. Maria's fight was over, but the work of rebuilding what Morrison had broken was just beginning. The drive home from the diner felt like traveling through a different world than the one Elena had inhabited that morning. Everything looked the same: the familiar streets of her neighborhood, the corner store where she bought milk, the playground where Carmen's kids spent their afternoons, but something fundamental had shifted in the space between her ribs, where her daughter rested against organs still recovering from adrenaline overload. Elena parked outside her apartment complex and sat in the suffocating heat, Agent Reeves' business card balanced on her palm like a compass needle. The federal agent's words echoed in her memory: "You've done enough." But Elena understood now that enough was a luxury she'd never possessed, not since the moment Maria had chosen to contact the FBI 8 months ago. Her phone buzzed, a text from Carmen. "Heard about arrests on the news. Are you okay? Kids want to know if Aunt Elena is coming for dinner." Elena stared at the message, remembering Morrison's casual threat about house fires and sleeping families. Her hands trembled as she typed back, "I'm okay. Yes to dinner. We need to talk." Inside her apartment, Elena found herself walking past the baby's room without looking inside. The crib she'd assembled weeks ago, the tiny clothes folded in drawers, the mobile that played lullabies. It all belonged to a version of herself who'd believed pregnancy was about preparing for joy instead of fighting to survive until delivery. Now every piece of infant furniture reminded her of the 23 babies Agent Reeves mentioned, children who'd been torn from their mothers before they'd even learned their faces. She pulled out her laptop and began typing, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of nursing documentation, but guided by a different purpose entirely. "Maria Elena Vasquez Memorial Foundation," she wrote at the top of the document, then stopped, her throat tightening around her sister's name. Her daughter rolled inside her, and Elena pressed both palms against the movement. "What do you think, little one? Ready to help some people?" The responding kick felt like agreement, Or maybe Elena was simply desperate to believe her child would understand the choice being made on her behalf. The foundation documents took shape slowly. Services for undocumented women during pregnancy and postpartum recovery, legal advocacy for mothers whose children had been trafficked, medical care provided without questions about immigration status or ability to pay. Elena found herself writing from knowledge she didn't know she possessed, understanding gained through osmosis during her weeks of unraveling Maria's secrets. When her phone rang at 4:30, Elena recognized Agent Reeves' number immediately. "I thought you should know," the agent said without preamble. "We found Isabella Moreno. She's 18 weeks pregnant, physically healthy, and asking about the midwife who tried to help her. Apparently Maria gave her your number before she died, told her if anything happened she should call you." Elena's laptop screen blurred. "Is she safe?" "She's at Methodist Hospital now, but Elena—" Agent Reeves paused. "She's undocumented, terrified, refusing to talk to anyone except you. I know what I said earlier about going home and resting, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. Elena was already reaching for her keys, the foundation documents forgotten on her coffee table. "Elena, there's something else. Isabella isn't the only one asking for you. Word is spreading among the women we recovered. Maria told several of them about her sister, the nurse, the one who would help them if Maria couldn't." Elena stopped moving. "How many?" 17 women, Elena. 17 women who trusted your sister enough to believe you'd be there for them when she couldn't be any more." Elena sank onto her couch, one hand supporting her belly as her daughter shifted restlessly. This was what commitment felt like, not a single heroic gesture, but the understanding that walking away was no longer an option. Maria hadn't just left her evidence of Morrison's crimes. She'd left her responsibility to the women who'd placed their faith in the Vasquez sisters' promise to fight for them. "Agent Reeves," Elena said. "That business card you gave me? I'm ready now. Are you sure? Once you start down this path—" "My sister started down this path for me," Elena interrupted. "Those women at Methodist Hospital, they're carrying babies just like I am. The only difference is they don't have anyone willing to fight for them except us." Elena hung up and grabbed her purse, pausing only long enough to text Carmen dinner might be late. Something important came up. As she locked her apartment door, Elena realized she was no longer running toward safety or away from danger. She was walking deliberately into the space Maria had carved out between them, where love meant action, where trust had to be built one courageous choice at a time, and where redemption was possible even when it rose from the ashes of unspeakable crimes. The final confrontation wasn't with Morrison anymore. It was with the question of what kind of person Elena would choose to become now that she understood the true scope of her sister's legacy. The automatic doors of Methodist Hospital slid open with a pneumatic whisper that reminded Elena of her sister's final breath. 7 months pregnant and moving with the careful deliberation of someone carrying precious cargo, she made her way through corridors that had become as familiar as her own apartment over the past few hours. The fluorescent lighting cast everything in the same harsh white she remembered from the storage unit. Clinical, unforgiving, revealing. Isabella Moreno sat curled in the corner chair of room 314, her 18-year-old face bearing the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd aged decades in the span of weeks. When Elena knocked softly on the doorframe, the girl's dark eyes lifted with the desperate hope of a drowning person spotting a lifeline. "You came," Isabella whispered. "Maria said you would come." Elena lowered herself into the visitor's chair, her own daughter responding to the proximity of another pregnant woman, with gentle rolls and shifts.
"Maria told me about you. About how brave you've been."
"I wasn't brave." Isabella shook her head. "I was scared. When those men took me from the church where I was staying, when they locked me in that house with the other girls, when they told us our babies would go to families who could give them better lives, I believed them at first. I wanted to believe them." Elena reached across the space between their chairs, offering her hand. Isabella took it with fingers that trembled like bird wings. "Believing them doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. They were very good at making their lies sound like mercy. Maria came to the house 3 times before they caught her. She pretended to be doing medical checkups, but she was really taking pictures, writing down our names, telling us help was coming. Isabella's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The last time she visited, she gave me this. Isabella pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her hospital gown pocket. Elena recognized her sister's handwriting immediately. Elena Vasquez, 210555047. If anything happens to me, call my sister. She will fight for you like I fought for you. Promise me you'll call. Elena's throat tightened. Even in those final weeks, when Maria knew Morrison's people were closing in, when every day brought her closer to the accident that would end her life, she'd been thinking about the women she wouldn't be able to save personally. She'd been building a bridge from her own commitment to Elena's future choices. Isabella, you're safe now. Morrison and his people are in custody. But I need you to help me understand something. Elena shifted forward, her pregnancy making the hospital chair increasingly uncomfortable. There are 16 other women here who are in situations like yours. They all need medical care, legal help, places to stay while they decide what's best for their babies. That's not something one person can handle alone. Isabella nodded, her grip on Elena's hand tightening. Maria said you were a nurse. Said you understood what it meant to protect children. I do. But what I'm thinking about doing, creating a foundation, building a network of people who can help women in situations like yours, it's bigger than anything I've ever attempted. And I need to know if women like you would trust an organization run by Maria's sister, even though you've never met me before. For the first time since Elena had entered the room, Isabella's expression shifted from desperation to something approaching strength. The other girls have been asking about you. Word travels fast here, even in the hospital. We heard Maria had a sister who was pregnant too, who found evidence that helped the FBI arrest Morrison. Elena's daughter chose that moment to deliver a particularly sharp kick to her ribs, as if reminding her mother that this conversation would shape both their futures. Isabella, what if I told you I was scared? That I don't know how to run a foundation or coordinate legal advocacy or navigate immigration law? What if I'm not ready for this? Isabella smiled for the first time, and Elena glimpsed the girl she'd been before Morrison's people had torn her life apart. Maria used to say readiness was a luxury people like us couldn't afford. She said courage wasn't about not being scared, it was about being scared and helping people anyway. The words hit Elena like recognition, like coming home to a truth she'd been circling around for weeks. Every woman in this hospital had made impossible choices while terrified. Every mother who'd trusted Maria with her most precious hope had been operating without guarantees or safety nets. Readiness had never been the point. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Agent Reeves. Isabella ready to give her statement. Other women asking for you too. Room 302 specifically requested the midwife's pregnant sister. Elena showed Isabella the message. Are you ready to help me figure out how to do this? Because I think we're about to take on something neither of us knows how to handle. Isabella squeezed Elena's hand. Maria always said the best way to learn something was to start doing it, especially when people were depending on you to succeed. Elena and Isabella were walking toward room 302 when the hospital's fire alarm began shrieking through the corridors. Emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red, and Elena's first instinct was to protect the girl beside her, until she saw Agent Reeves sprinting toward them with her weapon drawn. "This isn't a drill," the agent shouted over the alarm. "Morrison posted bail an hour ago. We lost him somewhere between the courthouse and—" The lights went out completely. In the absolute darkness of the hospital corridor, Elena heard Isabella's sharp intake of breath and felt her daughter responding to her elevated heart rate with urgent movement. Emergency lighting flickered on seconds later, casting everything in hellish shadows that danced across the walls like living things. "How is that possible?" Elena demanded. "You said he was finished, that his network was dismantled." His lawyer found a technicality in the warrant. Federal judge ordered his release pending appeal. Agent Reeves was scanning the hallway, speaking into her radio in rapid, clipped sentences. But Elena, Morrison didn't come here for revenge. He came here for you. The words hit Elena like ice water. For me? Think about it. You're 7 months pregnant, undocumented women trust you, and you're planning to build the exact kind of support network that would destroy what's left of his operation. You're not just a witness anymore, you're a threat to his entire future business model. Elena felt something shifting inside her chest, not fear but a crystalline clarity that surprised her with its intensity. Morrison had killed Maria for trying to save 17 women. Now he was here, in a hospital full of traumatized mothers and their unborn children, because Elena represented the continuation of her sister's work. Isabella, I need you to go to the nurses' station and tell them to lock down the maternity ward, Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Agent Reeves, how many of your people are in the building? Elena, you're not seriously thinking about... He's here because of me, Elena interrupted. Those women upstairs, Isabella, my daughter, they're all in danger because Morrison sees me as Maria's replacement. This ends with me, not with more women getting hurt. Agent Reeves grabbed Elena's arm. You're 7 months pregnant. You're not law enforcement. This is exactly what he wants, to draw you out, to make you feel responsible for protecting everyone else. Elena looked down at the agent's hand on her arm, then back up at her face. You said my sister was one of the bravest people you'd ever worked with. Do you know why she was brave? Because she understood that some fights choose you whether you're ready or not. The fire alarm stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the hospital corridor in a silence that felt more ominous than the noise. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, Isabella's rapid breathing, the distant sound of Agent Reeves' radio crackling with reports from other agents stationed throughout the building. He's in the parking structure, came the voice from the radio. Second level, near the medical staff entrance. But Agent Reeves, he's not alone. We count at least 3 men with him and they're heading toward the main building. Elena felt her daughter roll inside her, a movement that seemed less like distress and more like determination. 7 months of carrying this child through her sister's murder, through discovering the storage unit, through learning about Morrison's trafficking network. Everything had led to this moment in a hospital corridor where Elena had to choose between her own safety and the safety of 17 other women who had nowhere else to turn. Isabella, go upstairs. Tell the other women what's happening. Tell them Agent Reeves' people are here to protect them. Elena turned to the agent. And you need to understand something. Morrison isn't just here for me. He's here because he knows I'm about to become the biggest threat to everything he's built. He's right. Agent Reeves stared at Elena as if seeing her clearly for the first time. What are you saying? I'm saying my sister died to save those women, and Morrison thinks killing me will end what she started. But he's wrong. This doesn't end with me. It begins with me. Elena pressed both hands against her belly, feeling her daughter's strong, steady heartbeat beneath her palms. He wants the midwife's pregnant sister. He can have her. But he's about to learn the difference between Maria working alone and Maria's legacy working through an entire network of people who refuse to let him win. Elena started walking toward the stairs that led down to the parking structure, her pregnancy making each step deliberate but unstoppable. Behind her, she heard Agent Reeves speaking urgently into her radio, calling for backup, coordinating with hospital security, preparing for a confrontation that would determine whether Morrison's trafficking network ended tonight or simply found new victims to exploit. For the first time since Maria's death, Elena wasn't running towards safety or away from danger. She was walking directly into the heart of everything her sister had died fighting, carrying not just her own daughter but the future of every woman who would need someone willing to stand between them and the people who saw their children as commodities to be sold. The parking garage felt like descending into hell. Each level Elena walked down seemed to press closer around her, the concrete walls sweating in the oppressive Texas heat, even though the sun had set hours ago. Her daughter's movements had become urgent, almost frantic, as if the baby could sense the danger her mother was walking toward. Agent Reeves had caught up with her on the first landing, no longer trying to stop her but moving in tactical formation. weapon drawn. "Elena, when we see Morrison, you stay behind me, no matter what he says, no matter what he threatens." "He's going to want to make a deal," Elena said quietly, her hand tracing circles on her belly to calm her daughter. "That's what men like Morrison do. They negotiate, they offer trades." "What kind of trade?" Elena paused on the second-level landing, hearing voices echoing up from below. Morrison's cultured tone that she remembered from the storage unit, sharp and commanding, even in the concrete cavern of the parking structure. "Me for them. My silence for their safety. My daughter for their children." The words hung in the stairwell like smoke. Agent Reeves stared at Elena with something approaching horror. "You can't seriously be considering—" "I'm considering what my sister would do." Elena resumed walking, each step deliberate despite the tremor in her legs. Maria spent 3 years building relationships with those women. She died rather than give Morrison information that would hurt them. Now he's here because he thinks I'm going to carry on her work. They reached the parking level, and Elena could see Morrison through the glass doors of the stairwell. He stood beside a black SUV with 3 men who looked like private security rather than FBI agents. Even from a distance, Elena could see the calculation in his posture, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to buying and selling human lives. "Elena." Agent Reeves grabbed her arm one final time. "Whatever you're planning, think about your daughter. Think about Carmen, about the life you could have if we just let my people handle this." Elena looked down at her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of her child's heartbeat beneath her palms. 7 months of pregnancy had taught her that love wasn't abstract. It was the daily choice to carry something precious even when your body ached, even when you were scared, even when the future felt impossible to navigate. "I am thinking about my daughter," Elena said softly. "I'm thinking about the world she's going to be born into. Whether it's a place where people like Morrison can terrorize pregnant women because they know no one will fight back, or whether it's a place where her mother stood up when it mattered." Elena pushed through the stairwell doors into the parking garage. Morrison's head turned toward her immediately, and she saw recognition flicker across his face, not just of Elena, but of Maria's features reflected in her sister's bone structure. "Miss Vasquez?" Morrison called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I was hoping we could have a conversation." Elena walked closer, feeling Agent Reeves moving protectively beside her, hearing the static of federal agents coordinating through hidden radios. Her daughter's movements had calmed, as if the baby understood they had reached the moment everything would be decided. "The same kind of conversation you had with my sister." Elena stopped 20 feet away from Morrison, close enough to see the cold intelligence in his eyes, but far enough that Agent Reeves could react if his security moved. "Your sister was unreasonable. She let emotion cloud her judgment, couldn't see the bigger picture." Morrison's smile was practiced, the expression of someone who had convinced desperate people to make terrible choices. "But you're different, aren't you? You're a nurse. You understand cost-benefit analysis." Elena felt something crystallizing inside her chest, not fear, but absolute clarity. This was the moment, not just the confrontation with Morrison, but the choice between the safe life she'd planned and the dangerous legacy Maria had left her. "I understand that 17 women are upstairs in that hospital because my sister loved them more than she loved her own safety," Elena said. "I understand that you killed her because she wouldn't give you information to hurt them, and I understand that you're here because you think I'll make a different choice." Morrison's expression shifted, calculation replacing false charm. "I'm here because those women represent a significant financial loss. But you, Elena, you could help me recoup that investment. Pregnant nurse with connections to the undocumented community. You could be very valuable to the right people." Elena pressed both hands against her belly, feeling her daughter's strong heartbeat beneath her palms. Maria had died to keep Morrison from trafficking more babies. Now he was offering Elena the chance to become the very thing her sister had died fighting against. "You're right," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the parking garage. "I could be valuable to the right people, but you're not them. The choice was made. Not just to refuse Morrison, but to accept everything that refusal would cost her." Morrison's face went cold, the practiced charm evaporating like water on hot concrete. "You're making a mistake, Elena. A very expensive mistake." Agent Reeves stepped forward, weapon raised. "FBI, you're under arrest for—" The gunshot echoed through the parking garage like thunder. Elena's first instinct was to protect her belly, but the shot had come from behind Morrison, one of his own security team, weapon now trained on their employer instead of the federal agents. "Vincent Morrison," the man said in heavily accented English, "you are finished." Elena realized with crystalline shock that she recognized the voice. Carlos Mendoza, the man from Maria's journal entries. The father whose daughter had been trafficked through Morrison's network. The man who had been feeding information to the FBI for months. Morrison spun toward his betrayer, rage replacing calculation. "You son of a bitch. Do you have any idea what you've—" "I know exactly what I've done," Carlos said quietly. "I know you sold my daughter to a family in Dallas. I know she's been calling for her papa every night for 8 months. And I know you killed the midwife who tried to help us get her back." Elena felt her daughter's movement shift from urgent to almost peaceful, as if the baby could sense that the immediate danger was passing. Around them, Agent Reeves's backup team emerged from behind concrete pillars, surrounding Morrison's remaining security with practiced efficiency. "Elena," Agent Reeves called out, "it's over. We have him." But Elena was staring at Carlos, understanding flooding through her like relief. "You've been working with the FBI this whole time. That's how they found the trafficking house, how they knew where to look for the women." Carlos nodded, his weapon still trained on Morrison, even as federal agents moved to take his employer into custody. "Maria saved my wife during a difficult birth 2 years ago when our daughter was taken. When we had nowhere else to turn, your sister promised she would find a way to bring our family back together. She died before she could keep that promise, but she left enough evidence for the FBI to finish what she started." Elena watched Morrison being handcuffed, seeing not just the end of his criminal network, but the culmination of her sister's 3-year fight. Every woman Maria had helped, every family she'd tried to protect, every dangerous choice she'd made. It had all led to this moment in a parking garage, where justice finally caught up with the man who had built his fortune on stolen children. "The women upstairs," Elena said to Agent Reeves. "What happens to them now?" "Immigration lawyers are already coordinating with the hospital. Most of them will qualify for T visas as trafficking victims. They'll have time to recover, to make real choices about their futures." Agent Reeves holstered her weapon, her expression softening as she looked at Elena's pregnant form. "And you? What are you going to do now?" Elena felt her daughter's strong kick against her ribs, a reminder that her own future was arriving whether she felt ready or not. Upstairs in the hospital, 17 women were beginning the long process of healing from trauma Elena could barely imagine. Tomorrow, there would be legal proceedings, media attention, and the complicated work of rebuilding lives that had been shattered by Morrison's network. But tonight, for the first time since Maria's death, Elena could envision a future that extended beyond simple survival. The foundation she'd discussed with Isabella wasn't just a desperate fantasy anymore. It was a concrete possibility, a way to transform her sister's legacy into something sustainable and protective. "I'm going to learn how to do something I've never done before," Elena said, one hand on her belly and the other reaching into her pocket to touch the storage unit key she still carried. "I'm going to figure out how to help people the way Maria did, but without getting killed for it." Carlos approached them, his weapon secured, but his face still etched with the exhaustion of months spent living a double life. "Miss Vasquez, your sister gave me something before she died. She said if anything happened to her, I should make sure her family understood what she was fighting for." He handed Elena a small photograph, Maria holding a newborn baby, both of them in what looked like the storage unit nursery. On the back, in Maria's handwriting, "Elena, every child deserves to stay with the mother who loves them. Keep fighting. M." Elena stared at the photograph, seeing not just her sister's face but the absolute certainty in her expression. Maria had known the risks, had understood that standing between Morrison and his profits might cost her everything. But she'd made that choice anyway, because some fights were worth having, regardless of the personal cost. As federal agents led Morrison away, and the emergency vehicles began arriving to transport the freed women to safety, Elena felt her daughter settle into the peaceful rhythm that meant sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal complications, and the overwhelming task of building something permanent from the wreckage Morrison had left behind. But tonight, standing in a parking garage where her sister's 3-year fight had finally reached its conclusion, Elena understood that she was no longer running from Maria's legacy. She was preparing to carry it forward. 6 months after Morrison's arrest, Elena stood in the lobby of what had once been a failing medical clinic on San Antonio's east side. The space buzzed with controlled activity, Isabella coordinating with immigration lawyers in one corner, Dr. Sarah Chen reviewing medical files at a makeshift desk, and 3 women in various stages of pregnancy filling out intake forms in chairs that Elena had chosen specifically for their comfort and dignity. The Elena Vasquez Foundation for Family Preservation had opened its doors exactly 1 week ago. The name still felt strange to Elena, who had insisted on using her full name rather than just Vasquez to distinguish her work from the criminal organization that had destroyed so many families. She wanted no confusion about what they stood for. Carmen Elena Vasquez, named for both Elena's grandmother and her sister Maria's middle name, slept peacefully in a carrier against Elena's chest at 3 months old. Carmen had already attended more organizational meetings than most adults, her steady breathing providing a calming rhythm during the most challenging conversations about funding, legal procedures, and the delicate work of rebuilding trust with a community that had been systematically exploited. Elena, Isabella approached with a tablet in her hands. The Mendoza family is here for their appointment. Elena looked up to see Carlos entering with his wife Rosa and a small girl who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. The child stayed close to her parents, but kept glancing around with the cautious curiosity of someone still learning to trust new environments. The reunion had taken 8 months of legal proceedings and therapeutic intervention, but Morrison's conviction had fast-tracked the process of returning trafficked children to their biological families. Elena had attended the court hearing where custody was officially restored, watching Carlos weep as he held his daughter properly for the first time since she'd been taken. "Mr. Mendoza," Elena said, adjusting Carmen's carrier as she approached the family. "How is Sophia settling in?" "Better each week," Rosa answered, her hand protective on her daughter's shoulder. "The therapy is helping. She's starting to remember Spanish, starting to call us Mama and Papa instead of—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. The wealthy family who had purchased Sophia from Morrison's network had tried to erase every trace of her original identity. Carlos looked older than when Elena had first seen him in the parking garage, but there was something peaceful in his expression that hadn't been there during the months he'd spent living undercover to bring down Morrison's organization. "We wanted to thank you again for the legal assistance. The foundation, what you've built here, it's what Maria always wanted." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest at her sister's name. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but it had transformed from the crushing weight of unfinished business into something more like a guiding star. Every decision about the foundation, every policy they implemented, every woman they helped, Elena measured it all against what she thought Maria would have wanted. "Actually," Elena said, "there's something I wanted to discuss with both of you." She led them to the small office she'd claimed at the back of the building. The walls were covered with photographs, some of the women they'd helped, some of successful family reunifications, and prominently displayed the picture Maria had left for her through Carlos, her sister holding a newborn, both of them surrounded by the makeshift nursery in the storage unit that had started this entire journey. "I've been thinking about expansion," Elena said, settling into the chair behind her desk while Carmen continued sleeping against her chest. "We're helping women here in San Antonio, but Morrison's network extended across 3 states. There are families still separated, still trying to navigate systems that weren't designed to help them." Rosa leaned forward. "What kind of expansion?" "Mobile services. Legal clinics that can travel to smaller communities where undocumented families are afraid to seek help in official channels. Medical care, legal assistance, family reunification services, everything in one coordinated program. Elena paused, watching their faces carefully. I want to offer Carlos a position as our community outreach coordinator. The silence stretched long enough that Elena worried she had overstepped. Carlos had spent months living a dangerous double life to bring down the people who had destroyed his family. She had no right to assume he wanted to continue fighting battles that weren't his own. But Carlos was nodding slowly, looking at his wife and daughter before meeting Elena's eyes. Maria told me once that the only way to heal from what people like Morrison do to families is to make sure they can't do it to anyone else. I've been wondering how to honor that. Elena felt Carmen shift in the carrier, a small movement that reminded her of the steady heartbeat that had carried her through the most terrifying moments of the past year. Her daughter would grow up in a world where people like Morrison still existed, where families were still vulnerable to exploitation and separation. But she would also grow up seeing that people fought back, that her mother and aunt had refused to let evil win simply because it was safer to look away. Then welcome to the Foundation, Elena said, extending her hand to Carlos. Maria would be proud of what we're building. Carlos clasped her hand, his grip firm with the kind of purpose Elena recognized from her own reflection these days. When do we start? Tomorrow, Elena said, surprising herself with the certainty. There's a family in Laredo whose 2-year-old was taken 8 months ago. Immigration lawyers think we can fast-track the case if we have someone who understands the system from the inside. Rosa lifted Sophia onto her lap, and the little girl immediately settled against her mother's shoulder. We'll need to arrange childcare for the mobile clinic days, Rosa said practically. But yes, this is the right thing to do. 3 hours later, Elena stood alone in the Foundation's lobby as the last volunteer locked up for the evening. Carmen had woken and nursed, and was now alert and calm, watching the late afternoon light filter through the windows that Elena had insisted be large and welcoming, the opposite of the oppressive fluorescence in most government buildings where undocumented families were forced to seek help. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen, 3 more referrals from Presbyterian. Word is spreading. Elena smiled, shifting Carmen to look out at the street. When she'd first cut the lock on Maria's storage unit 8 months ago, she'd been a woman barely surviving her own life, pregnant, broke, grieving, and completely unprepared for the complexity of her sister's legacy. She'd wanted simple answers. Was Maria a hero or a criminal? Should the storage unit contents be destroyed or preserved? Could Elena just take what little money there was and disappear into a quiet life somewhere far from San Antonio? Now she understood that Maria had never dealt in simple answers. Every choice her sister had made existed in the gray space between legal and right, between safe and necessary. The storage unit nursery that had once seemed like evidence of trafficking now housed the Foundation's emergency supply of infant care items for mothers fleeing dangerous situations. The medical equipment Elena had initially found sinister was being used by Dr. Chen to provide prenatal care to women who couldn't access traditional health care. Even the journals that had first terrified Elena, detailed records of births, payments, and family separations, had become the Foundation's template for documentation that protected rather than exploited. Every family they helped was recorded not for profit, but for follow-up care, legal advocacy, and the kind of long-term support that prevented children from being lost in systems designed more for efficiency than compassion. Carmen made a soft sound, and Elena realized her daughter was looking directly at Maria's photograph on the wall. That's your aunt, Elena said softly. She died before you were born, but everything we're doing here, it's because she taught me that some fights are worth having even when you're scared. The front door chimed, and Elena turned to see Agent Reeves entering with a woman Elena didn't recognize. Young, maybe 20, visibly pregnant, and carrying the particular wariness that Elena had learned to identify in women who'd been running for a long time. Elena, Agent Reeves said, this is Luz Morales. Her baby is due in 6 weeks, and she needs the kind of help we can't provide through official channels. Elena studied Luz's face, seeing the same desperate hope that had probably been in her own expression when she'd first realized that Maria's death meant she would have to become someone she'd never planned to be. The foundation was still small, still operating on grants and donations that required careful management. They couldn't help everyone, couldn't solve every problem that Morrison's network had created or prevent every similar network from forming. But they could help this woman. They could make sure her baby was born safely and stayed with her. They could provide legal advocacy and medical care and the kind of community support that turned survival into stability. "Welcome to the Elena Vasquez Foundation," Elena said, approaching Luz with the calm confidence she'd developed over months of learning that her sister's work could be done ethically, sustainably, and without the secrecy that had ultimately killed Maria. "We're here to help you and your baby stay together, and we're going to start right now." As Elena led Luz to the intake area, calm and sleeping peacefully against her chest, she felt the presence of something larger than herself. Not just Maria's memory, but the continuing story of women who refused to let their children be stolen, who fought systems designed to separate families, who chose love over safety and justice over silence. The storage unit key still lived in Elena's desk drawer, though the unit itself had long since been converted into additional office space. Sometimes she held the key during particularly difficult cases, remembering the woman she'd been when cutting that lock represented the scariest thing she could imagine doing. Now she knew that the scariest thing was actually much simpler, learning to live with the knowledge that the world contained people like Morrison and choosing to fight them anyway, for Carmen, for Luz, for every family that deserved to stay whole. It was exactly the choice Maria would have wanted her to make.